They say in Boston, the cardinal rule of good nursing is simple: don't get attached. But what if the boy you've been sneaking chocolate pudding to every Tuesday for the last 2 months turns out to be the son of the man who owns half the city's waterfront? Hazel Brennan was just a floor nurse at Mercy General, drowning in student loans and surviving on vending machine coffee. She thought she was just keeping a lonely kid company during the worst weeks of his life. She didn't realize that by sitting beside that boy's bed and reading him comic books on her break, she was threading herself into a world she had no business entering. This isn't a story about romance. It's a story about what happens when ordinary kindness collides with extraordinary power, and why sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to look away. The pediatric oncology ward at Mercy General smelled of antiseptic and artificial grape, a combination Hazel had stopped noticing 18 months ago. At 6:45 in the morning, the ward was quiet in the particular way that hospitals are quiet, not peaceful, just held breath. Hazel tucked her dark hair under her scrub cap and clipped her badge to her chest. The overhead fluorescence hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in its patient, indifferent way. She was 27 years old. Her nursing school loan sat at $93,000. Her father, Warren Brennan, was 3 weeks post-op from a double bypass at this very hospital. In a different wing, 2 floors down, racking up bills that his Medicare supplement wasn't going to cover. Hazel had done the math on her break last Tuesday. It had made her physically nauseous. She refilled her water bottle at the station, grabbed her patient chart, and started rounds. Room 412 was last, like always. The boy in room 412 was 8 years old and had been admitted 6 weeks ago for a bone marrow biopsy that confirmed what his previous doctors in New York had suspected. He had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He had started his first round of chemotherapy 10 days ago. He had not, in Hazel's observation, complained once. Not when the nausea hit, not when his hair began coming away on the pillow, not when the blood draws woke him at 4 in the morning. His name was Miles. He had no mother listed on his intake form. The emergency contact was a man named Mr. Sterling, first name redacted by the family's legal team for privacy reasons, which Hazel had thought was strange when she first read the chart and then promptly forgotten about. The man listed as primary guardian and financial guarantor had apparently prepaid the entire estimated treatment cost up front in a wire transfer before Miles had even been assigned a bed. The billing department had talked about it for a week. What Hazel knew was this: Miles was alone in that room more often than any 8-year-old should be. A rotating cast of men in dark suits came and went, not nurses, not doctors, not family friends. They stood outside the door and checked their phones and spoke to each other in low voices. They never sat with him. Miles, for his part, did not complain about this either. On the 4th day of his admission, Hazel had walked in to check his IV line and found him carefully folding his hospital blanket into a shape that was not quite a crane and not quite a frog. She had sat on the edge of the chair beside his bed, just for a moment, she told herself, and said, "Is that origami?" He had looked up at her with brown eyes that were serious in the way children's eyes get when they have been required to be too careful for too long. "I'm trying," he said. "I don't have the instructions." "I know the crane," Hazel said. "My grandmother taught me." He handed her the paper. She folded him a crane. He watched every fold like he was memorizing it. Then he asked her if she could show him again, slower this time. She was 20 minutes late finishing rounds. After that, it became a thing. Not an official thing, nothing documented, nothing that would show up on a patient care report. But on her break, and sometimes between rounds when the ward was quiet, Hazel stopped in room 412. She brought him a chocolate pudding cup from the staff refrigerator on the 2nd Tuesday, the good kind, not the sugar-free version they gave the patients. And he had eaten the whole thing in approximately 45 seconds, and then looked at her like she had performed a miracle. She started bringing them every visit. The men in suits outside the door noticed. One of them, a heavy-set man with a neck like a fire hydrant that Hazel had privately nicknamed Cinderblock, had stopped her in the hallway at the end of her 3rd week of this. "You're the nurse who brings the pudding," he said. "I'm the nurse on this floor," Hazel said, which was technically an answer. Cinderblock looked at her for a long moment, chewing something. "He's not supposed to have outside food. Chocolate pudding is on the approved list for pediatric oncology patients on his current protocol," Hazel said. "I checked." She had, in fact, checked specifically because she intended to keep bringing it. Cinderblock stared at her for another 3 seconds, then went back to looking at his phone. Miles had been in the middle of a chemotherapy infusion the morning it all changed. He was propped up against his pillows, the IV line running into his thin arm, a comic book open on his lap. One of the vintage Spider-Man issues Hazel had brought him from the used bookstore on Boylston, $3 each, out of her own pocket. He looked pale in the particular way chemo patients look pale. Not sick pale exactly, but translucent. Like someone had turned the brightness down on him. Hayes knocked twice and pushed the door open. "How are we doing?" she asked, checking his drip rate. Miles didn't look up from his comic. "Nurse Patterson yelled at someone in the hall this morning. Nurse Patterson yells at everyone," Hazel said. "It's her love language." He almost smiled, almost. He was working on it. She was adjusting the tape on his IV port when the room changed. It wasn't dramatic. Just a shift in pressure, the way the air feels different when someone important enters a space. She heard the door open behind her and assumed it was Dr. Okafor making early rounds. Then Miles looked up, and his face did something complicated. Something caught between relief and guilt and the specific kind of love that hurts because it comes with fear attached. "Dad," he said. Hazel turned. The man standing in the doorway of room 412 was not what she expected. She had been building a mental picture for 6 weeks based on available evidence. The wire transfer, the security detail, the redacted name, the prepaid bill. She had expected old money and sharp edges. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with close-cropped dark hair going grey at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a black suit. No tie. His eyes, when they found her, and they found her immediately, in the way that some people's eyes just do, were a flat, unreadable grey. He was not wearing a ring, Miles, the man said, and his voice was low and unhurried. He crossed the room in 4 strides and stood at the head of the bed, putting his hand on the back of his son's skull in the careful way men do when they're terrified of breaking something. He looked at the IV. He looked at the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. He looked at Hazel. "Mr. Sterling," one of the suits said from the doorway, "this is the nurse. The one we mentioned. The one we mentioned." Hazel didn't like the sound of that. "You're the one who brings him pudding," the man said. It wasn't a question. "I'm the primary nurse assigned to this patient," Hazel said, which was again technically accurate and also not quite the full picture. The man looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than was comfortable. "Miles talks about you," he said. "He said you know origami." "Just cranes," Hazel said. "He's made 47, the man said. He counted. Hazel had not known that. Something tightened briefly in the man's expression, like a fist closing and opening. He pulled the chair from the corner and set it beside the bed and sat down, the way men who are used to commanding rooms sometimes sit, spine straight, hands on his knees, completely present in a way that made the rest of the room feel smaller. "Could you give us a moment?" he said to the suits in the doorway. It was framed as a question. It was not a question. The door closed. Miles had gone back to his comic book with the studied casualness of a child who was very carefully not listening. The man, Mr. Sterling, looked at Hazel with those flat grey eyes and said quietly, "How is he?" Honestly. She could have given him the clinical version. She had it memorize current protocol, response markers, projected second-round timeline, Dr. Okafor's cautious optimism. She started to say it. Then she looked at Miles, pretending to read. "He's braver than he should have to be," she said instead. The man went very still. "He doesn't complain," Hazel continued, keeping her voice low and even. "Not once. He saves the cranes in a shoebox under the bed. He's teaching himself chess from a library book he asked me to bring him. He asked me last week if his hair would come back. And when I said yes, he said okay, and then he went back to his comic and didn't mention it again." She paused. "He's doing everything right. He just needs someone to sit with him sometimes. Not standing outside the door. In the room." The silence that followed was very long. "I travel for work," the man said finally. "I'm sure you do," Hazel said. She excused herself before either of them could say anything else. She was at the nursing station, updating charts, when Cinderblock appeared at her elbow 20 minutes later. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you. I have 3 other patients. I'll let your charge nurse know you'll be a few minutes." It wasn't a request. She understood that. She also understood, in the way that you understand things when your instincts are still functioning properly, that the correct response was probably compliance. She had student loans. She had her father 2 floors down. She was not a person who could afford to make enemies in expensive overcoats. She went back to room 412. Miles was asleep, curled on his side with his comic book tucked against his chest. The man was standing at the window, Boston spread out below them in the grey October morning, the harbour flat and pewter-coloured in the distance. He didn't turn around when she came in. "My name is Roland Sterling," he said. "I'm aware you don't know who I am, and I'm going to let that go because it's actually somewhat refreshing." A pause. "Sterling Maritime. Cargo logistics. We move approximately 30% of commercial freight through Boston Harbor." Hazel said nothing. He turned. "Miles's mother was killed in an accident at our Charlestown terminal 2 years ago, an equipment failure. She was touring the facility. His voice was completely controlled, which told her more than if he'd been visibly upset. Miles was with her. He was 6. He got away with a broken arm. He looked at his son for a moment. Some things don't heal as neatly as bones. The shape of it clicked into place, the silence in Miles, the careful, watchful way he moved through the world, the 47 cranes. I have enemies in my industry, Roland continued, turning back to the window. Competitors who would not hesitate to use my son to influence my decisions. The security presence is not performative. It is necessary. He let that sit. I'm also aware that a rotating perimeter guard is not the same as a parent being present. He said the last word like it was a thing he'd been arguing with for some time. Why are you telling me this? Hazel asked. He turned fully to face her. Because I want to make you an offer, and it will seem strange out of context. It already seems strange in context, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but something adjacent. Miles needs continuity, Roland said. He needs one person who is consistent, who is not afraid of him, who doesn't handle him like he's made of glass. He paused. He needs you, not as his floor nurse, as his private care coordinator, full-time. You would travel with us. I'm in Boston for the next 3 months, and after that New York, possibly London. Your compensation would cover your nursing loans entirely, plus a salary at 3 times your current rate. Your father's outstanding bills would be settled today. Hazel stared at him. How do you know about my father? She said. I know everything about anyone who spends significant time with my son, Roland said. There was no apology in it, just fact. I had you researched the 2nd week. Hazel Marie Brennan, BSN, Mercy General, 3 years. Previously Mass General, student loans of $93,000. Father Warren currently post-cardiac surgery on the 4th floor, mother deceased, no siblings. He tilted his head slightly. You paid for the comic books out of pocket. You took a 15-minute break last Tuesday to sit with him because the aide shift had a gap and he was alone. You have not once mentioned to anyone on this ward that the security detail outside his door makes you uncomfortable, even though it clearly does. Hazel's throat was dry. You're asking me to leave this hospital, she said carefully, and come work for you. I'm asking you to come take care of my son, he said. They're not the same thing, and if I say no? Roland looked at her steadily. Then you walk out of here and go back to your ward, and nothing changes. I'm not in the business of coercion a beat. The debt offer stands either way. Your father's bills will be paid regardless. Consider it a thank you for the pudding. Hazel didn't believe the no coercion part entirely. Men like this didn't make offers that weren't engineered to be accepted. But she looked at the small shape of Miles in the hospital bed, the shoebox visible under the frame. She knew now what was in it, and she thought about what it meant to be 8 years old and running out of people who were not afraid of you. I need a week to transition my patients, she said. You have 3 days, Roland said. I have a flight Thursday. She untied her brake pass from her badge and set it on the window ledge. I'll need my own car, she said. I don't ride in motorcades. Roland looked at the pass on the ledge. Then he looked at her. Fine. She left before she could change her mind. The Sterling residence on Beacon Hill was not a house. It was a statement. 4 stories of Federal period brick with window frames painted the color of old bone, set back from Louisburg Square behind a low iron fence that looked decorative and was not. Hazel arrived Thursday morning in her own car, a 2019 Civic with 112,000 miles on it, which she suspected had never been parked on this particular street before in its life. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Calloway, who was approximately 60 and had the bearing of a retired general, met her at the door and showed her to a suite of rooms on the 3rd floor that was larger than her apartment. The closet contained clothes in her size. Practical things, nothing showy, all high quality. The ensuite bathroom had a clawfoot tub that Hazel decided she would pretend not to care about. Mrs. Calloway gave her a tour with the warmth of a controlled burn. The 3rd floor was Smiler's domain. The 2nd floor contained Roland's study and the formal rooms used for business. The basement and service areas were for staff. Mr. Sterling's personal schedule is his own concern, Mrs. Calloway said. Your concern is Miles. Meals, medications, rest schedule, and whatever therapeutic activities Dr. Okafor has approved. She looked at Hazel with the particular expression of someone who has not yet decided whether to respect her or dispose of her. He eats better when someone sits with him. He hasn't been eating. I know, Hazel said. We'll fix that, Mrs. Calloway's expression shifted approximately 2 degrees towards something that might eventually become warmth. Miles's room was at the end of the hall, and when Hazel knocked and opened the door, he looked up from his chessboard. The pieces set in what she recognized as the middle of a problem, and his face did the same complicated thing it had done when his father walked in. Relief and guilt and love with fear underneath. Hey kid, Hazel said. You actually came. Miles said. I actually came, she said. Now, show me where you've been stuck. He pointed at the Queen. She pulled up a chair, things settled into a rhythm. Miles had treatment days on Tuesdays and Fridays, outpatient now, with a medical van and 2 of the suits. On other days, Hazel organized what she thought of as a normal childhood schedule, to the extent possible. Breakfast at the table, not in bed. Reading, 1 hour of whatever Miles felt like doing, which rotated between chess, origami, and a growing obsession with documentary films about deep-sea creatures. Lunch, rest, an afternoon activity. Dinner. Roland joined dinner when he was in the house, which was 3 or 4 evenings a week. He sat at the head of the table and asked Miles questions. Not careful questions, not what are you feeling questions, but real ones. What was the documentary about? What move had he made in chess? What was the best part of the day? Miles answered in his measured, careful way. And Hazel watched Roland listening and thought about how much it cost him to keep his face neutral when the answers broke his heart a little. She was not supposed to be cataloguing these things about him. Rule 3, she told herself, though Roland hadn't stated any rules. She was here for Miles. It was on a Wednesday evening that she found it. She had come downstairs at midnight, her throat dry, the house asleep, to get water from the kitchen. On her way back, she passed the door to Roland's study, which was slightly ajar, not open, just slightly not closed. A light was on inside. She should have kept walking. She pushed the door open. It wasn't Roland's desk or his papers that stopped her. It was the wall beside the window. Someone had taped drawings there, 4 of them, in crayon and marker, the style immediately recognizable as Miles's. She had seen enough of his artwork in the hospital. She crossed to look at them. 3 were familiar. Variations on the cranes, a chess piece, something that might have been a harbor. But the 4th was different. It was done in red and black marker, pressed hard into the paper the way children press when they are not making art but doing something else. It showed a dock or a pier, and on the dock a dark shape, a piece of machinery, she thought, a crane or a loader, and beneath it a figure, a woman, unmistakably, and standing off to the side of the drawing, watching, was another figure, tall, male, wearing what Miles had rendered as a dark coat. This figure had no features drawn on its face, but around its neck Miles had colored in a careful detail, a chain, and on the chain something square and red, a pendant, a red pendant. Hazel stared at it. Miles had seen something, had drawn what he saw, and the figure watching wasn't helping. The figure with the red pendant was standing apart, and Miles had drawn a speech bubble coming from its blank face. Inside, in Miles's shaky letters, "Don't tell." The floor behind her creaked. She spun around. Her water glass slipped and hit the hardwood and shattered into 3 pieces. Roland was standing in the doorway in a dark sweater and jeans, his reading glasses pushed up on top of his head. He looked at the broken glass, then at the monitor on the desk she hadn't noticed, showing 4 camera feeds, Miles's room, the front entry, the street, and one aimed, she now saw directly at the area near the window where she was standing. Then he looked at her, then at the wall, at the drawing. His expression went very still. "I shouldn't have. The door was open," she said. "I'm sorry. I know the rules." "I didn't give you any rules," Roland said quietly. "I figured some out on my own," she said. He walked into the room and stopped in front of the drawing. He stood there for a long moment. "Miles drew that 8 months ago," he said. "He didn't show it to me. Mrs. Calloway found it folded inside a library book he returned. She brought it to me." His jaw tightened. "He's never mentioned it because he's afraid," Hazel said. "Not of you. He's afraid of the man in the drawing." Roland turned to look at her. "That's not me," he said. There was no defensive heat in it, just a flat statement of fact. "I was in Rotterdam when the accident happened. I have 12 hours of documentation and 40 witnesses." He looked back at the wall. "Do you see the pendant?" She looked. "Yes. I don't wear jewelry," he said. He held up his hands, the same gesture she'd seen fathers make in 1,000 different contexts, bare palms an offering. "I never have. My wife gave me a watch and I wore it until... I don't wear it anymore." A pause, "But one of my directors does, a man named Terence Bright. He wears a red coral pendant his mother gave him. He wears it every day. He was at the terminal that morning." The air in the room changed. "You think he had something to do with the accident?" she said. "I think my wife went to that terminal because someone told her she needed to sign off on a freight certification that required her signature on site," Roland said. "And I think the person who told her that was Terence Bright. And I think the equipment failure was not a failure." He said it all in the same quiet, controlled voice, and she understood then that the control was not coldness. It was the alternative to falling apart. "I don't have proof. I have a drawing by an 8-year-old which is not admissible in any context, and a chain of circumstances that my lawyers describe as suggestive but insufficient." "He saw something," Hazel said. "He saw something," Roland agreed, "and whatever it was, it put him in a room where he doesn't speak about it. He draws it instead." He looked at her. "He gave those other drawings to you at the hospital, the cranes, the chess pieces." A pause. Did he give you anything else? She thought about it. One Wednesday, 2 weeks before his discharge, Miles had handed her a folded piece of paper and said, "Don't open it yet." She had put it in her scrub pocket and then come home and forgotten and run the scrubs through the wash. The paper had come out a pulped square. She had felt terrible. "He gave me something I lost," she said. "I'm sorry." Something crossed Roland's face. What did it look like? "I didn't open it. It was small." He folded it. It could have been origami. She stopped. "Or a drawing." Roland looked at the wall for a long moment. Then he turned back to her, and the control slipped, just slightly. Not enough that you would call it breaking, but enough that she could see the shape of the man underneath. Exhausted. Frightened. Entirely out of options he could live with. "I need you to understand something," he said. "Terrence Bright still works for me. I have not moved against him because I have nothing solid enough to use, and if I move too early and fail, I lose the only chance I'll get. But he knows Miles was there that day, and Miles has been getting quieter." He leaned forward, one hand on the desk. "My son has been getting quieter since we moved to Boston, and this facility is where Bright is based." The cold moved through her slowly. "Is Miles in danger?" she said. It came out flat, because she already knew the answer. "Probably not directly," Roland said. "Bright isn't reckless, but he is patient. And he knows that if Miles ever says clearly, out loud, what he saw that morning," he stopped. "Then tell the police," Hazel said. "I have," Roland said. "What I told you about insufficient evidence, I said to them first. They agree it's suggestive. They are watching. It is a very slow watch." He looked at her. "My son speaks to you. He gives things to you that he doesn't give to me. I need you to know why I watch. The cameras aren't surveillance of you. They're my attempt to see everything that I'm not present for, to catch whatever I'm missing." Hazel looked at the 4 drawings on the wall. "He trusts me because I don't need anything from him," she said slowly. "When I sit with him, I'm not trying to get him to say the thing. I'm just there." "Yes," Roland said. "And you want me to keep doing that," she said. "Not to extract anything. Just to keep being the person he feels safe with." "Yes," he said again. "And if he gives me something, I give it to you." "To me and to Detective Mora at Boston PD simultaneously," Roland said. "Not through lawyers, directly." Hazel thought about it for a long moment. Then she looked at the drawing of Miles's mother on the dock, small and rendered with a child's grief, and she thought about what it meant to be 6 years old and be told, in whatever way that figure had told him, "Don't say what you saw." "Okay," she said. Roland's shoulders moved slightly, a nearly imperceptible release. He crouched down and picked up the 3 pieces of the broken glass without comment and set them on the desk. "Go back to sleep," he said. "Lock your door." She did. The morning had the bright, cold clarity that October sometimes delivers in Boston, like an apology for all the grey. Hazel came down at 7 to find Miles already at the kitchen table, eating a piece of toast in small, careful bites and watching, with intense focus, a documentary on his tablet about anglerfish. This was progress. 2 weeks ago, he hadn't been eating breakfast at all. She made herself coffee and sat across from him. "Anglerfish again?" she asked. "They make their own light," Miles said. "In the dark. They just make it themselves." "That's a useful skill," Hazel said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his sweatshirt and put something on the table between them. It was a folded piece of paper, not origami. "I made this a while ago," he said. "I didn't know who to give it to before." Hazel looked at it. She didn't touch it yet. "Miles," she said carefully, "before I open this, can you tell me, did you want your dad to see it too?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she didn't push. Then, "I think he needs to." She picked up the note and went upstairs and knocked on Roland's study door. He opened it immediately, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. She handed him the folded paper. He opened it at the desk, under the lamp. She stood behind him and looked over his shoulder. It was a drawing. More detailed than the ones on the wall. Miles had been 8 months older when he made this one, his hand steadier. A dock. A machine. His mother, clearly, recognizably. The yellow hair he had drawn her with every time. And the figure with the pendant, close now. Much closer than in the earlier drawing. And one detail she hadn't seen before, the figure's other hand was raised, not touching anything, but raised, and the piece of machinery was in motion. It was not an accident in the drawing, it was not ambiguous, and on the figure's wrist, where a sleeve had ridden up, Miles had drawn a small shape with painstaking care, not the pendant this time, a tattoo or a mark or perhaps a scar. 2 letters intertwined, TB. Hazel heard Roland exhale one long breath. "That's enough," he said quietly. He picked up his phone. The weeks that followed were not dramatic from Hazel's vantage point inside the house. They were quiet and somewhat tense and threaded through with the ordinary business of helping a small person get better. Miles's second round of chemo went better than the first. He started eating properly. He started sleeping in longer stretches. He asked for a second chessboard so he could set up multiple problems at once. Terence Bright was placed on administrative leave pending investigation on a Thursday 14 days after Roland made the call to Detective Mora. He was arrested quietly, at his home in Cambridge, by 4 officers. No press by agreement with the DA. Hazel didn't learn the details until later, and Miles never knew the name. What Miles knew was that his father came home earlier on a Thursday, which was not a usual day, and sat with them at dinner and ate an entire meal and asked Miles what he was working on in chess, and actually listened to the whole answer. He stayed at the table until Miles's eyes went heavy, and then he carried him upstairs, which Miles allowed with the drowsy, unguarded trust of a child who has finally exhaled. Hazel was cleaning up the kitchen when Roland came back downstairs. "It's done," he said. She kept drying the glass in her hand. "Is he safe?" "Yes," Roland said. He leaned against the counter. He looked for the first time since she had met him, like someone who had set down something heavy. "There's a trial. It will take time. But he's safe." Hazel set the glass down. "Miles said something to me this morning," she offered, because she thought Roland should know. "He said he thinks the anglerfish is his favorite animal because it doesn't need to wait for light to come from somewhere else." She paused. "I thought you'd want to hear that." Roland looked at her for a moment. "He said that," he said. "He said that." Something moved across Roland Sterling's face that she had not seen there before. Not the controlled grief, not the calculating watchfulness, not the devastating competence he wore like a second overcoat. Something simpler, something that looked a great deal like hope. "Thank you," he said, "for the pudding, the cranes, all of it." "It wasn't strategy," she said. "He's just a good kid, I know." Roland said, "He's the best thing I've ever made. I don't say that out loud enough." She let that sit in the room between them. 6 months later, the shoebox under Miles's bed had been joined by 3 others. He had run out of cranes and moved on to more ambitious structures. A heron, a lotus, an elaborate multi-piece peacock that Hazel had helped him assemble over the course of 2 weekends. His hair had grown back, thicker than before, and he wore it pushed to one side in a way he'd seen in a documentary about some architect he admired. His latest labs had come back with numbers that made Dr. Okafor use the word excellent, which Hazel knew was not a word she deployed lightly. On the evening of his first clear scan, Roland had come home with pizza, which Miles considered a significant and very good development, and they had eaten it at the kitchen table and watched the anglerfish documentary for what Hazel believed it was the 4th time, and Miles had explained the bioluminescence in a tone that suggested he was slightly concerned they might not fully grasp its importance. Roland caught Hazel's eye across the table, and she caught him catching it, and they both looked back at Miles, who was describing photophores with the authority of someone who had been waiting his whole life to be an expert in something. After Miles was asleep, Roland found Hazel in the upstairs hallway outside his door, the way she always did a last check before she turned in. "He's good," she said quietly. "His color's good. He ate half a pizza." "He ate more than me," Roland said. They stood in the hall, and the house was quiet in a completely different way than hospitals were quiet, warm, settled like a breath that had finally been let out. "I was going to give you notice tonight," Hazel said, "or I'd planned to, before the scan came back." Roland turned to look at her. "I've been in contact with a pediatric oncology fellowship program," she said, "in New York. I applied in September. I was going to finish the transition here, and..." She stopped. "The scan changes the timeline. He still has 2 more rounds. He still needs continuity. He needs you," Roland said. It was direct, the way he said most things, but there was something different in the texture of it. "He's doing beautifully," she said. "He'll keep doing beautifully. He knows how to make light in the dark now." Roland was quiet for a moment. "The fellowship is in New York. Yes, Sterling Maritime's main office is in New York," he said. "We've been in Boston because of the trial and because of Miles's treatment team here. But Dr. Okafor has a partner practice on the Upper West Side." He paused. "I'm just stating facts." Hazel looked at him. "Those are very specific facts," she said. "I'm a specific kind of person," he said. She looked at the closed door of Miles's room, thinking about anglerfish making their own light in the deepest dark, and about a boy who had been silent for 2 years beginning to fill a house with his voice. "Send me the Manhattan listing," she said. "I'll think about it." Roland reached into his coat pocket and held out a folded piece of paper. She took it, unfolded it. It was a drawing. Done in marker, not crayon, his skill had improved enormously. 3 figures standing on what was clearly a pier, the harbor behind them in blue. A tall man, a woman with dark hair, and a boy between them with a paper crane in his hand. Underneath, in steady letters that no longer shook, "We are a family, Miles." Hazel's throat tightened. "He gave it to me this morning," Roland said. "I think he intended it for you." She looked up. Roland was watching her with those flat gray eyes, and they weren't flat anymore, she realized. They never had been. She'd just been too busy looking at Miles to notice what was behind them. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did for my father. He doesn't know it was you." "He doesn't need to," Roland said. Outside the tall windows of the house on Beacon Hill, Boston was doing what it does in April, turning slowly from something endured into something worth staying for. Hazel folded the drawing carefully, the way Miles had taught her, every edge aligned, no pressure on the center, and put it in her pocket. And that is what kindness actually looks like in the end. Not the grand gesture, not the rescue, just a woman who sat down next to a boy who was folding the wrong kind of paper and stayed. It turns out that sometimes the smallest act of paying attention is the one that changes everything. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It truly helps this channel grow. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done? Would you have taken the offer or walked away? Let us know in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one.